Hi, this is Stephanie, and I'm reading Chapter 11, Cultivating Mushrooms on Logs and Stumps. So he starts by saying traditionally, dowel or plug, quote unquote, plug spawn, has been used to inoculate logs and stumps, although shiitake cultivators sometimes also use sawdust. The advantage of dowel spawn is its staying power. The dowels survive longer than the sawdust, which is quickly consumed by the mycelium and munched by insects. The dowel's longer survival time gives the mycelium a better chance of infecting the log. However, automated sawdust inoculators are far faster than hand-delivered plug inoculation methods. Sawdust spawn is less expensive by weight than plug spawn, but sawdust spawn is less dense and is prone to falling out of inoculation sites unless packed tightly. One's choice is a matter of experience and scale. For homeowners, gardeners, and those whose labor expense is not a determining factor, I recommend using dowel spawn for inoculating logs and stumps. In large commercial operations, the benefits of automation usually tip the scales in favor of sawdust spawns. In growing mushrooms on stumps, plug or sawdust spawn can be used separately or in combination with rope spawn and spored oils. Growers who use sawdust spawn to inoculate logs and stumps place a cap on the inoculation hole after inserting the sawdust in order to keep the sawdust from falling out. Some shiitake growers in Korea, for instance, sell equipment that automatically inserts sawdust spawn into the inoculation hole, in some cases capping it with a plug of styrofoam. However, this method seems contrary to the philosophies of recycling, sustainability, and reducing pollution, tenets usually supported by those growing mushrooms naturally. Most log growers of shiitake, whether they inoculate the logs with sawdust or dowel spawn, cover the holes with a dab of melted wax. Cheese wax, beeswax, and, less preferably, paraffin are used. Another method of inoculation developed by some innovative Japanese growers is wafer spawn, thin cellulose wafers grown through with mycelium that are inserted into cuts in the log or stump. The cutting equipment and wafer dimensions are sized so the task of insertion can be completed quickly, in some cases in a single pass. Although this innovation may be successful, I prefer dowel plug spawn because it's vigorous and easy to handle, and sawdust spawn for its economy. And then he has a figure 184 here where he shows plug spawn for inoculating logs. Mycelium grows in the grooves of the spiral dowel, helping it to recover from the shock of inoculation. And the next section is entitled, Which Trees Are Best for Cultivation? The ideal trees for stump or log cultivation are those that the mushroom species grows upon naturally. The simplest way to find a mushroom's natural host is to consult a reputable field guide's description of the preferred habitat of that species. Many saprophytes, however, are opportunistic. If given the opportunity, they can adapt to types of wood not ordinarily found in their natural domain. I'll use shiitakes as an example to illustrate the selection and growing process of mushrooms on trees. Shiitakes grow wildly on a wide number of hardwoods in Asia, particularly oaks. Pioneers in shiitake cultivation long ago discovered that other woods would also support this mushroom with a little encouragement. Fortunately, we have several decades of experience comparing shiitake strains and yields. A good study conducted by Joe Deedon and the Minnesota Forest Research Center expanded the cast of characters of trees that will support shiitake to include woods like elm, maple, ironwood, and honey locust. Several themes emerged from this and subsequent studies. Although oak is the natural host for shiitake, alder, eucalyptus, and other rapidly decomposing hardwoods are readily colonized by this species. Generally, mushrooms are produced sooner on these than on the denser hardwoods that are slower to decompose. Shiitake mushrooms form on alder in 6 to 12 months, whereas oak can take 1 to 2 years, and the denser ironwood can take 2 to 3 years before first flushing. A significant advantage of denser woods like ironwood is a longer lifespan for fruiting, often lasting 5 to 10 years. Another major factor affecting lifespan is the bark layer. Many mushrooms inoculated onto rapidly decomposing hardwoods like alder, birch, and aspen stop fruiting once the bark has peeled off. However, other mushrooms, such as Hyphloma capnoides and Hyphloma sublaterium, continue to produce well after the bark layer has fallen off. In fact, I have seen Hyphloma sublaterium fruit 8 years after inoculation on fallen alder logs, when the logs had decomposed significantly into loose, long, pulpy fibers. On pages 174 to 176 is a list of tree species that are suitable for growing many of the saprophytic mushrooms listed in this book. This list is not exhaustive. Many other tree species may also be suitable. If you have successes with tree species not listed, please write to me about your experiences. As always, I encourage experimentation, but I recommend conducting many trials before investing much time and money. A couple of trees not listed are cedars and redwoods. The only mushroom species I know of that has the enzymatic strength to saprophytize these difficult to decompose woods is again the heroic clustered woodlover, Hyphloma capnoides, and the cedar and redwood logs I have been supporting this mushroom were aged at least 20 years. I suspect that the mycelium struggles to decompose these woods for a long time before a mushroom forms. For this reason, I would suggest using this tree fungus pairing for experimental or environmental purposes and not for production. In many cases, storms or catastrophic events provide windfalls of wood for mushroom growers, who can assist with efforts to clean up storm debris. In many urban and suburban areas, homeowners commonly pay people to remove their fallen trees. Alternatively, I know of several arborists who have added mycelium to their repertoire of services and products, and thus set themselves apart from competitors, increasing their markets. These mycologically astute small business owners offer a variety of plug and outdoor spawn so homeowners can select their preferred fungal friends for recycling wood debris. Burning storm debris is increasingly unpopular and, in some municipalities, illegal. As an alternative to burning, which causes pollution, sudden emissions of carbon dioxide, and denutrification of soil, growing fungi as I turn the page here, on wood allows for the entrainment of nutrients back into the ecosystem, improvement in soil structure, and the gradual release of carbon dioxide over many years. So the next section is entitled, When to Cut Logs and Which Logs Are Best. Cutting your logs in the late winter or early spring when the sap begins to run helps to ensure high sugar content. The precise time depends upon your location. However, disregarding conventional wisdom, I have inoculated alder cut at all times of the year without producing noticeable differences in yield. Your results may differ depending upon the trees and location. Choose logs that are healthy. When choosing logs to inoculate, avoid woods with any sign of decay, wounds, evidence of blight, or pre-existing mushroom growth. You can tell which logs are already infected by looking at their freshly cut ends. The ends of healthy logs show growth rings without mottling. The ends of infected logs show a marbling, since the mycelium runs parallel to the cell walls. If a side branch or an infection is seen near the cut zone, you can sometimes salvage the log by cutting away the infected zones. I recommend that you cut a full meter away from the last detectable area of discoloration and that you inoculate the log at double the usual rate. The length of log is up to you. Most log growers cut logs approximately 1 meter long, stacking them off the ground until the time of use. When logs make ground contact, many other organisms jump from the soil, causing infections. With some species, such as reishi, a preferred method is to make pony logs, 2 feet or so in length, that, after inoculation, are placed into black pots, which are then filled with gravel or sand. The next section is entitled, How are logs inoculated? So the standard method for inoculating logs is to drill holes and insert plug spawn or sawdust spawn into the holes. Molten wax is dabbed on the mycelium-filled hole to seal it and prevent beetles and other bugs from eating the mycelium. The hole size is usually around 5/16 of an inch or 8 millimeters. A drill is used to bore holes that are deeper than the length of the plugs. If you are inoculating only a few logs, the least expensive method is to use a drill or modified grinder holding a 5/16 inch or 8 millimeter drill bit. Modified grinders are far faster than drills. In the Far East, cultivators use specialized equipment designed to automate the process. Although inoculating logs is labor-intensive, the experience is socially bonding and fun, especially for families and children. Logs of many different diameters can be used. Often they average 4 to 8 inches in diameter. A sufficient quantity of plug spawn for this size log would be 30 to 50 plugs. Logs greater than 10 inches in diameter are notoriously slow to fruit and require much more spawn. The plugs are spaced 4 to 6 inches apart in long rows along the log's length. The rows are staggered to form a checkerboard pattern of inoculation points, ensuring full and even coverage. As the mycelium grows from the plugs, island colonies form and enlarge over time. Large diameter logs have proportionately more mass than smaller ones, and hence the mycelium has greater real estate to conquer. Naturally, fruitings on these logs begin much later. I occasionally inoculate logs of very large diameter just to see what will happen. In some cases, I'm still waiting. Most 4 to 8 inch diameter logs fruit in 1 year from the time of inoculation, with some producing in only 6 months, while others take up to 2 years. Generally speaking, mushrooms growing on logs are damaged by direct sunlight and are best placed into a forest-like setting or under a porous canopy. Since humidity is high near the ground and radically diminishes with elevation, many mushrooms benefit from being placed close to the ground or directly in contact with it rather than being stacked. On the other hand, ground-dwelling logs rot faster and are more subject to insect damage, and some species, such as shiitake, do not fare well as when they are elevated. Consequently, placement should depend on the preferences of the species. And then the next page has several different photos, which I'll describe. So there's one where there's a guy with a mallet hammering plugs into this log. It says logs are positioned on a table and drills equipped with the 5/16 inch drill bits are used to make holes. By making the holes 1.5 times deeper than the plug is long, the grower forms a cave deep within the log, allowing the mycelium to fill the chamber. Then the next picture is a young woman holding a pretty large log, and it says, like some cultivators, Virginia Fraser likes to dip the ends of the logs to prevent invasion from competitor fungi. The holes are dabbed with molten cheese wax. A gourmet stainless steel baster is a good tool for efficiently placing a measured dose of wax in each hole. And then the next picture is of a whole bunch of logs stacked in, it looks like just a forest of trees. And it says, once inoculated, the logs are laid to rest on a pallet or stacked in shady areas. For drier locations, I recommend covering them with a shade cloth or tarp to buffer against wild fluctuations in humidity. And then the next picture shows kind of the cut end of a log. And it says, after 6 to 12 months, mycelium can be seen at the ends, showing discolorations, a sure sign that the logs are colonized end to end with mycelium. Note that the mycelia flow inward from the outer surface where the spawn dowels were inserted. And then there are a couple more pictures which I'll describe. It says here, Damien Pack coaxed a shiitake flush from this alder log by immersing it overnight in water 2 weeks before. And then there's another picture of Steve Simonades, and he's holding an alder log fruiting with reishi. Fruitings occur 2 or 3 times a year depending upon strain, wood, temperatures, and other conditions. About 1/2 to 2 pounds of mushrooms may be cropped from each log every year. By the 5th year, alder logs slow in their fruitings, and by the 10th year, oak logs usually expire and fall apart. Maximum production is usually seen in the first third of the log's lifespan. In the end, the log, now made up of pulped wood, is a mere fraction of its original weight and disintegrates into long white fibers upon handling. When the logs are grown through, the ends will show bands of discoloration caused by the emerging mycelium. Once the mycelium surfaces at the ends, the log is ready to fruit. Several students of mine forego fruiting altogether and incubate logs specifically to create tiger or Spalding maple, for instance, especially favored by cabinet makers for its unique zonations and sheen. At one company I know of, the workers use reishi on maple to create a beautiful shimmering pattern. And he has a picture here of quote-unquote Spalded or tiger a maple shaker box made of wood from a log inoculated with reishi. When using the beefsteak fungus, the wood is stained red, which increases the wood's value, especially oak, substantially. Many other species can be used for colorizing wood. The logs are usually milled 2 to 4 years after inoculation. Then he continues on. When one strategy fails to result in mycelium, using a combination strategy might overcome resistance. Having 4 options for inoculation is an advantage when dealing with the unknown. The combination method is not much more labor intensive, but it is clearly beneficial because of the synergistic effect of complementary inoculations. For instance, when cutting logs for shiitake inoculations, having spores of the shiitake strain in the bar oil of the chainsaw ensures that the faces of the cut logs will have spores of this mushroom resident, helping prevent competition from other fungi. These logs are then inoculated with plug or sawdust spawn of the same strain. This combination of methods using matching species accelerates colonization and overcomes resistance barriers. Then he has several more photos which I'll describe. So one is of a young woman placing these stumps into little buckets. So once these pony logs are inoculated with plug spawn and the holes are waxed over, Virginia Fraser places them into black plastic pots, which are then filled with sand. They can be conveniently stored beneath the benches of a standard greenhouse, benefiting from the added moisture and the stabilizing influence of contact with the ground. Then the next photo is of some beautiful mushrooms sprouting or fruiting out of a log, and it says about 6 months later the mushrooms emerge, in this case reishi. And then there's a photo of David Brigham, who used a chainsaw to scar logs with wounds into which spawn will be placed. The next picture is sawdust spawn of Nemiko covers the wounds and spans the gaps between the logs. Then fresh wood chips are placed atop the raft of spawned logs. The next section is entitled Growing Mushrooms on Stumps. Stumps and their root systems can be massive, often weighing hundreds of pounds. Once stumps are inoculated, colonization can occur for years before mushrooms form. Once fruiting begins, mushrooms can sprout for prolonged periods, sometimes decades, before the stump totally decomposes. Growing mushrooms in wood chips or on logs is far faster, but this apparent disadvantage of using stumps to grow mushrooms also foretells of its advantage. Mushroom fruiting can persist on a stump for many years longer than on wood chips and logs. I have seen a stump produce wood lovers, for instance, every October for more than 10 years. Stumps that are interspersed amongst overshadowing stands of trees have the best chance of success. Cultivation issues are much the same for stumps as for logs. Like logs, if the stumps show fungal activity, signified by discolored zones of growth, and/or sport mushrooms, most likely during the rainy season, they are not good candidates. The wood should be bright and homogeneous in color. In addition, stumps of recently felled trees are by far preferred and are best inoculated within a few days of their creation. The reason for this is that wild mushroom spores constantly rain down, especially during mushroom season. If they fall onto exposed wounds, wild fungi may colonize the faces of cut stumps and logs first. Stumps with fine fissure cracks, called checks, running through them are more quickly colonized with mushroom mycelium than those without, especially if mycelium is placed directly into these cracks. The method for inoculating stumps with plug spawn is similar to that for logs, except the cut face of the stump is a huge wound, allowing the entry of competitors, and should be inoculated with no more than 4 inches of spacing across the face. In addition, using rope spawn and spored oils increases the probability of complete colonization. Such combinations of methods are described next. So before I go on to that, I'll just describe the different photos he has. So there's a drawing where it's showing 2 people inoculating stumps with plug spawn. And then figure 200 is the clustered wood lover has fruited from the same stump for more than 10 years. Once a gourmet mushroom is established on a stump, you have years of delicious fungi to enjoy. And then the next figure shows the best place to inoculate a stump is the inside of the peripheral edge into the sapwood. So it shows someone kind of hammering, malleting these little plug dowels into the very edges of the stump. Next photo shows some beautiful mushrooms coming out of a stump, and it says oysters and honey mushrooms fruiting from the same stump. Such events suggest that oyster mushrooms, which are saprophytes, can be good competitors against honey mushrooms, which have a dual nature, first parasitic, killing trees, and then saprophytic, growing upon their dead tissue. And then we have 2 more photos. One is of oyster mushrooms fruiting from coil of hemp rope. The rope spawn is an effective way to inoculate stumps. And then the last photo is cauliflower mushrooms fruiting from hemp rope. This species, as well as wood lovers, an edible mushroom, a poisonous mushroom, and turkey tail, a medicinal mushroom, fight Amarilla root rot. Okay, so now he describes the quadruple inoculation method of stumps. Combined inoculation methods do a better job of colonizing stumps than do single methods used alone. For myco-restoration projects in particular, I recommend using a quadruple inoculation strategy. Although any of the described inoculation methods can be triumphant, using a quartet of methods is more likely to result in success. As mentioned, plug spawn may be more attractive for home growers than professionals. Here are the methods that I recommend for myco-restoration warriors on the front lines. The first is spored oils, used while cutting the trees, creating logs and stumps. Then the second is rope spawn, Girdle and wrap the stumps with rope spawn. The third is plug spawn. Drill and inoculate stumps and logs with plug spawn. And then the third is fourth, sawdust spawn. Use sawdust spawn in a fungal quote-unquote sandwich. You will need the following tools: remote drill or a modified grinder with backup batteries, or a ready source of electricity, such as a small generator, a 5/16 of an inch drill bit, chainsaw and safety gear, and a hammer and a 2 to 4 inch flathead nails. In the first method, you'll use chainsaw oil infused with mushroom spores or spored oil when cutting trees and logs so that the open cuts are exposed to the selected fungus immediately upon contact. The second method is similar to that of inoculating logs using plug spawn, using spawn of the same lineage as the spores in the chainsaw oil. The difference is that the inoculations are concentrated just inside the peripheral edge of the stump. This sugar-rich zone provides food for the mycelium, which then streams in all directions in between the bark and cambium. The third method is to use a chainsaw to girdle the stump 4 to 12 inches above the ground, and then insert rope spawn into the groove. Painting exposed rope with hot wax helps to protect the mycelium from bugs, keeps the moisture in, and encourages the mycelium move into the wood. You can make your own by soaking the rope in peroxide using the technique described on page 162, or using prolonged hot water pasteurization described on page 163, and inoculating it with grain or sawdust spawn. Simply sprinkle grain or sawdust spawn over the rope and place it into a plastic bag. Let the inoculated rope sit at room temperature for a month or until fully colonized with mycelium. For the grand finale, the fourth method, you can cut off the top 12 inches of the stump, remove this cylindrical section, spread spawn, preferably sawdust spawn, evenly across the surface, and return the cut section to the spawn-covered face, making a spawn quote-unquote sandwich. And then he has a note. Using a chainsaw and falling trees are both highly dangerous activities. Do not attempt unless you are skilled at doing both. Take all appropriate precautions. And he also says we use spent oyster sawdust or straw after it has produced mushrooms indoors. For many, a simple method is to use the leftover mycelium from a mail order mushroom kit after it has produced mushrooms. Then he goes on to say covering the outside edge of the cut with wax or fabric can prevent bug invasion. If bugs gain access to the implanted mycelium, especially mealybugs or beetles, they can take up residence. However, if your goal is to attract blight-causing insects with the intent of stopping an insect migration, then using a mycopesticidal fungus may be a good strategy. For instance, blighting insects could be drawn to the mycelium sandwich stump and become infected with an entomopathogenic fungus, stopping the further migration of forest-devastating insect plagues. A ring of such stumps could provide a line of defense. By introducing mycelia via several vectors, you maximize the likelihood that the mycelium will take hold. Mycelium at each point of inoculation grows outward, eventually connecting and enveloping the stump beneath the bark layer in a contiguous mat of mycelium from which mushrooms will sprout for years to come. Then he goes on to say, the quadruple method is the approach I prefer to use to overcome acceptance barriers. The labor per stump, depending upon size, takes 5 to 20 minutes, a small investment considering the long-term rewards. Members of a skilled crew can work in tandem, speeding up the process. When the goal is to create a leading edge of mycelium encircling many acres, Using a plurality of inoculation methods tips the balance in favor of the intended mycelium. Once established, the mycelium may remain resident for decades. The forms of spawn used in the spored oil, plug, rope, and sawdust all pivot around a predominant phenotype, or a single individual, while the spores in the chainsaw oil provide for alternative phenotypes originating from the same mother mushroom. Having these additional phenotypes improves the adaptability of the species entering into the stump's complex microbial universe. When phenotype dominates is influenced by environmental factors. Which phenotype dominates is influenced by environmental factors. In the process called anastomosis, or same-self fusion, the mycelium seeks itself and fuses with compatible substrains, and spores and mycelium marry into a single organism. The multiple inoculation method creates a matrix of inoculation points, preforming a net-like checkerboard pattern. From each inoculation point, the mycelium grows to meet other satellite colonies and become a communal web, benefiting from the shared nutrition. The many points of inoculation all synchronize for rapid colonization. And he calls this the QIM. The QIM is ideal for mycoforesters, particularly those interested in corralling a habitat with a mycological species buffer. For instance, if a root rot plague is sweeping a forest, by inoculating stumps on the peripheral edge of the nearby woodlands, a mycoforester can establish a zone of resistance, quashing or limiting the disease by creating a mycelial fence. Similarly, veins of particular mushroom species can be threaded through the forest. Interweaving these threads creates a fabric of species. Using such techniques, mycoforesters can project quote-unquote smart species of mosaics of mushrooms to move silently through landscapes, governing the health of fungal, insect, plant, and animal communities. So there are a few pictures of the author himself girdling a stump, and then he's inserting rope spawn and tapping it into a groove using a hammer. And then he's using a 5/16" diameter rope spawn, slightly swelled with water, makes insertion easy since the chain saw cut is also 5/16". If inoculating a live tree, 2 parallel girdles stuffed with rope spawn are recommended. He says, note, girdling a tree will kill it. Okay, and then the last section is entitled Initiating the Flush, Encouraging Mushrooms to Form on Logs and Stumps. When growing mushrooms outdoors, mimicking rainy natural weather conditions helps promote fruiting. About 6 months to 2 years after inoculation, most logs myceliated with shiitake, oyster, reishi, and other species will flush mushrooms soon after an overnight submersion in cold water. This timely soaking of your logs is a technique called an initiation strategy. The best time is when temperatures and rain patterns outdoors are within the natural fruiting range of the chosen species. Your role is to increase the frequency of rain showers. Afterward, keep the logs loosely tarped or, if ideal weather conditions prevail, wet and in the right temperature range. Uncover the logs, watering them 2 or 3 times a day. Replace the tarp with a 70% shade cloth after watering. Partially buried logs should be watered 2 or 3 times a week, depending on weather conditions. Use a drip line to conserve water, or locate your logs below your house's downspout, but not if your roof tiles are made of asphalt or contain petroleum or other toxic products. Generally, I don't water stumps, allowing nature to induce fruitings during the rainy seasons. With some luck, mushrooms will begin forming on logs within 2 weeks of initiation. Mushrooms will often first form near where the holes were originally drilled, and they will also cause the bark to blister and crack as they emerge. Stumps fruit when they want to, but providing shade and exposure to rain will help promote mushroom formation. Watering must be budgeted according to the needs of the developing mushrooms. The mushroom's princely forms will tell you if you are under or over watering. Most cultivators quickly understand how much moisture needs to be applied by carefully observing the flush develop. Watching a population of mushrooms emerging from adolescence to adulthood and beyond gives you a spread of individuals to guide you. If 10 of 10 mushrooms that form grow to full maturity without blemishes or drying, then the grower has succeeded in coaxing a flush. If only 2 of 10 grow healthily, then the grower adversely affected the flush's development. Mushrooms are best harvested before they heavily sporulate, before populations of microscopic basidia emerge and bear spores. Most mushrooms are at this stage when they are adolescents or young adults. For example, gilled mushrooms have generally reached the stage when they are convex in shape and not yet flattened. You can easily see spore dust collect around the mushrooms when they mature. You will gain a good understanding of the beginnings and endings of the mushroom cycle, which spans a week or more, from simple observation. When harvesting mushrooms, usually it is best to trim them as close as possible to the substrate. Leftover stems often attract insects and molds. Don't throw away your stem buds without first thinking of using them as spawn for further inoculations. And that was discussed in Chapter 9. Sometimes keeping the stem buds attached to the plucked mushrooms has advantages. Growers have found that selling mushrooms with stem buds attached, oftentimes with a clump of substrate, prolongs shelf life compared to trimmed mushrooms. Knowing this gives cultivators more options in managing their crops for personal consumption versus selling them to the market. Stem buds from store-bought mushrooms can be used to spawn for outdoor inoculations. Viability declines with age. After you have harvested your first flush, your logs and stumps will usually lapse into a period of dormancy. If they do not fruit again immediately after the first flush, let them sit for 2 to 3 weeks before reinitiating them by heavily soaking them in water. Stumps often fruit continuously during the rainy season and fall. In regions where water is scarce, collecting rainwater from roofs and channeling it to your mushroom patches is a convenient way to provide them with necessary moisture. Installing understory and overstory shade plants also helps to increase and preserve humidity. And that's the last bit of Chapter 11.